Yesterday, some far-left activists got a lesson in what happens when people without guns try to fight people with guns. And one of these far-left Antifa-type individuals got shot, I believe, possibly several times. The gist of the story, so I don't bury the lead, is that a group of far-leftists were trying to tear down a statue. A militia, they call themselves the New Mexico Civil Guard, showed up to defend the statue. When scuffles broke out, things got heated. Eventually, the New Mexico Civil Guard started to back off, and the far leftists threw a rope over the statue and tried pulling it down. One man who is presumed to be a member of the militia was in a scuffle with the far left extremists, who then started, hitting him and beating on him. He may have pepper sprayed. Somebody may have pepper sprayed. It's hard to know exactly what happens. But following this first scuffle, what happens next is clear. A man in a blue shirt begins to retreat from the crowd, to run away. Several people then chase after him, yelling things like, "Get him." One guy yells something like, "We are going to kill you." Two people are seen on video beating this man, who draws his weapon. You can see it in his hand. And there's a guy, I think he's hitting him with a skateboard. And the guy in the blue shirt who's being beaten then fires several shots. The man who was wearing all black is then laying on the ground as medics come to treat him. The New Mexico police, I believe it's the police, come in and they arrest the New Mexico Civil Guard, the militia. Now, it's interesting to me and worrisome, in fact, that I believe local politicians have come out against the local militia, saying that they were showing up with guns to intimidate the crowd. And that presents a very, very serious problem. The police weren't enforcing protecting public property, that these protesters had the intent to destroy, to make an offensive maneuver, albeit against property. And the New Mexico Civil Guard came out to defend that property. There's a big difference between defense and offense. If you want to see a statue taken down, you can vote on it. We are a nation of laws. We're not a nation of angry, random mobs of a small group of people deciding they get to determine what's best for us. Unfortunately, for the people in New Mexico, the police are not enforcing these laws, and they're not protecting your property. So this gives way to right-wing groups to stand up and defend the property where the state won't. Now, this is not an endorsement of anything they're doing. I'm saying it's a natural consequence. Somebody will rise up to try and uphold the law if the police won't do it. So there's the gist of things. I want to read this story for you, and we've got some updates. Some people are trying to argue that the man who shot was antagonizing the crowd. Therefore, it's justified that they were beating him. I'm sorry, man. Listen, they chased after him. That's it. No matter what he did, up until he could have insulted their mothers and smacked them around and flicked their ears and threatened their lives. But as soon as he ran away and they chased after him, they became the aggressors and they lose, in, as far as I can tell, legal standing. But I'm not a lawyer, so we'll see how things play out. But a lot of people I do see saying, look, man, if someone's running away and you yell, "We're going to kill you," and then several people start beating on you, I'm pretty sure that's clear-cut self-defense. The New York Times says, man is shot at protest over statue of New Mexico's conquistador. Two statues of Juan de Oñate are being removed after long simmering tensions between Native Americans and Hispanics over Spain's conquest of New Mexico. Gunfire broke out during a protest Monday night in Albuquerque to demand the removal of a statue of Juan de Oñate, the despotic conquistador of New Mexico, whose image has become the latest target in demonstrations across the country aimed at writing a history of racial injustice. Oh, and don't you love just how the New York Times frames everything? As dozens of people gathered around the statue of Oñate, New Mexico's 16th century colonial governor, shouting matches erupted over proposals to take it down, and a man was shot, prompting police officers in riot gear to rush in. Perhaps the police officers should have been there in the first place to stop a mob of lunatics from tearing down public property. Okay, look, I'll be honest. I don't know the inner workings of this local jurisdiction. I believe in Albuquerque. Maybe the mob, for some reason, was sanctioned to do it. I have no idea. But look, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter who was right or wrong about the statue. It doesn't matter if the guard was right or wrong to keep it, if the protesters were right or wrong to leave it. It matters that they chased after a guy and started beating him. All right, let's read. The man who was unidentified was taken away in an ambulance, and the police took into custody several members of a right-wing militia who were dressed in camouflage and carrying military-style rifles. It was not clear whether any of them had fired the shot. Witnesses said the gunman was a white man in a blue t-shirt. So I believe we do have an update here. They say Police used chemical irritants and flashbangs to protect officers and detain individuals involved in the shooting, the Albuquerque Police Department said in a news release. The individuals were disarmed and taken into custody for questioning, not arrested. Chief Michael Gear of the Albuquerque Police Department said on Twitter that authorities were investigating reports that vigilante groups instigated the violence. If this is true, he said, the department will be holding them accountable to the fullest extent of the law, including federal hate group designation and prosecution. Do you know where this goes? Law enforcement? Man, do we have serious problems in this country. Our local law enforcement sits idly by and does nothing as mobs are going around destroying statues. They tore down a statue of Thomas Jefferson. They are not just targeting conquistadors, and these cops are doing nothing about it. I'm not saying it's right for anyone to show up with guns and defend this property. I'm saying it will keep happening. It will get worse, and they will turn on you. In South Philadelphia, I think like 100 plus, maybe hundreds of men showed up with mostly with nothing but some with baseball bats, guarding a statue of Christopher Columbus from far leftists. It's going to keep happening. It's going to escalate. You're going to see more militias show up. The police are then going to say, but the mobs are allowed to do this. Are you nuts? Maybe if the police would actually stop this. It's really funny to sit back, watching this from afar as the police and our government do literally nothing as violent mobs destroy our cities, riot, and tear down statues. And it just keeps getting worse. And then they do nothing but blame the militias that are saying, hey, how about you don't go around destroying things? Well, in this instance, look, somebody got shot, right? So determining who's at fault will be important. And based on the videos I've seen that have gone viral, it really does look like the crowd chased the man and then he shot them. That's it. Sorry, end of story. We have a law. We have a certain expectation that people can flee and you can't chase them. Let me show you this update. Well, here's what they say. The victim was in critical but stable condition. I mean, I think it took several rounds because apparently 4 rounds were shot. The protests turned into pandemonium after the shooting, and protesters screamed and dove for cover as police officers attempted to secure the scene. The police used chemical irritants and stun grenades to protect officers and detain individuals. We read that already. Thanks for rewriting it, New York Times. Hours later, Mayor Tim Keller announced that the Oñate statue would be removed until the appropriate civic institutions could determine how to proceed. The shooting tonight was a tragic, outrageous, and unacceptable act of violence, and it has no place in our city, the mayor wrote on Twitter. Our diverse community will not be deterred by acts meant to divide or silence us. Perhaps the mayor didn't actually watch the video. Our hearts go out to the victim, his family, and witnesses whose lives were needlessly threatened tonight. The sculpture has now become an urgent matter of public safety. The victim, was it the guy being beaten by several people, one with a skateboard about to whack him in the face? Or is he talking about the guy who chased after him with his friends yelling, "We're going to kill you"? Interesting question, right? The protest over the statue came on the same day that political leaders in Albuquerque announced a sweeping reorganization of policing in the city, shifting funds away from its scandal-plagued police department to create new community safety department, to create a new one. The initiative will give 911 dispatchers the option of a community safety response aimed at de-escalating situations rather than involving police officers or firefighters. The new department is expected to respond to calls related to homelessness, addiction, and mental health. Hey, that's amazing. Isn't that what I was talking about all these past several days? Like some kind of civil guard that doesn't handle firefights, overt criminality, civil guard that can deal with lower level issues. Hey, there we go, man, right? Police officers were not seeing during the early portions of Monday night's protest over the statue, which marked a new phase in the debate over racial inequities that began with the death of George Floyd. Yeah, we get it. As protesters across the country have targeted a variety of symbols of racial injustice, including statues of Christopher Columbus, the protests in New Mexico are evolving to target symbols of colonial atrocities and Thomas Jefferson in Portland. Earlier in the day, authorities in the northern town of Alcalde removed a different statue of Oñate, whose brutal rule as provincial governor put into motion centuries of Spanish rule in the region. Let me just tell you something. You know it was freaky? The New York Times recently had a revolt where the woke far leftists won. And now the framing of all their stories is very, very obvious. They shouldn't be telling us, listen to this, whose brutal rule as provincial governor put into motion centuries of Spanish rule in the region. This is brutal rule. Maybe it's true, but you got to understand its framing. And it's not necessary to the story right now. You can just say that he was a colonial leader. Many the protesters feel that colonial leaders, yada yada yada. The New York Times is presenting us framing devices from the left-wing perspective, just like we saw with the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone or occupied protest, whatever it is they're calling it now. The agitation against honoring Oñate reflects a tension that has long festered between Native Americans and Hispanics over Spain's conquest more than 4 centuries ago. With protests this year over police violence unleashing a broader questioning of race relations in this part of the West. Oñate's period as governor was marked by a violent repression, considered severe even by the standards of his time. He killed 800 indigenous people in the Acoma Pueblo and ordered his men. Okay, listen, I got a question. Why is the New York Times giving us a history lesson on their perspective of who this guy is? That's going to influence your view of who was right or who was wrong, especially after you read the message from the mayor. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you the merits of this colonial leader, what he did or didn't do. I don't care. That has nothing to do with the factual news events that are happening today of whether or not a fight that broke out was justified. In order to de-escalate pending conflict, we can ignore our personal framing or our subjective framing of what the story should be. I mean, we could very easily start talking about the Native Americans' savagery or whatever else that they would want to claim. They're taking a left-wing perspective on this that has no merit on the story. That I find particularly worrisome as we move forward. But hey, don't say I didn't tell you so. Don't say I didn't tell you this was going to happen. When I said I did a segment on the New York Times being purged, we are seeing now, I think, 8 or 9 major media institutions having their leadership purged, even ABC News. What this means now is that all of the stories you're going to see will always make sure to frame the left as the heroes. But let me break something down for you. A group of people without the will of the people, just on their own, of their own ideology, went to destroy public property. That's my understanding as public property, right? The statue, there's a petition calling for its removal, but no one's made any decisions. Well, we are not a dictatorship or a fundamentalist, fanaticist government where zealots can go around destroying things and we're okay with it. We're a country where if you want to make changes, we have to agree to them. And sometimes we lose out because we are in the minority. But we elect representatives who then go and make decisions. On certain issues, we have a city council meeting. We might say, hey, you know what? We all vote in favor of removing this. Some people might get mad and say, no, don't remove it. But you know what? We voted. It's going to happen. Okay. Government can't, these systems aren't perfect, but we do our best. The New York Times is now framing a group of fanatics with a zealous ideology. They're framing them as the good guys who were victimized by the right-wing militia defending the evil, colonial, brutal dictator, whatever. Framing is irrelevant to the situation. I could break it down very simply. A bunch of guys showed up to defend a statue that was public property. A bunch of leftists came to tear down that statue. A fight broke out. They chased after one of the right-wing guys. They beat him. He shot in self-defense. That's all you need to know. Now, of course, I have my framing. I'll call them far-left extremists, but let's be honest. I'm not gonna break down the histories, try and tell you who was the good, what was right or what was wrong in their morality. But I absolutely will break down as it pertains to the rule of law. You can't show up and destroy things. That is illegal. And that's the framing you need to understand. Well, apparently they issued some long statement, which is, in my opinion, terrifying. The governor's office sent a statement. So I read to you the statement from the mayor already. The governor said, although we're still learning more about the situation, I am horrified and disgusted beyond words by the reports of violence at a protest Monday night in Albuquerque. The heavily armed individuals who flaunted themselves at the protest, calling themselves a civil guard, were there for one reason: to menace protesters, to present an unsanctioned show of unregulated force, to menace the people of New Mexico with weaponry, with an implicit threat of violence, is on its face unacceptable. That violence did indeed occur is unspeakable. I am monitoring the situation. My administration is in touch with local officials. The individual who was injured is in my prayers, and I'm thinking of their family and friends. Let me clear. There is absolutely no space in New Mexico for any violent would-be militia seeking to terrorize New Mexicans. And there is no space for violence of any kind on our streets and in our communities, or for any sort of escalation of reckless, violent rhetoric, no matter who strikes first. The instigators this evening will be rooted out. They will be investigated, and they will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. No, they won't. Morality policing is here, and I hope you've been paying attention. In New York, they are dropping the charges on protesters involved in the Black Lives Matter protests while telling churches they're not allowed to sing. They're not allowed to show up. They can't go and pray. They welded the gates shut to a Jewish playground. That's what's happening with morality policing. In Fort Worth, they announced that rioting charges will be dropped. When Tucker Carlson covered this on his show, Fort Worth's police came out and said Tucker Carlson is lying. We never said that. They actually did. Now, there's some semantic debates over what they really meant, but Tucker Carlson made reference to looting and rioting and vandalism and that the charges are being dropped. And then Fort Worth came out and said, that's not true. Never happened. They did. Fort Worth issued a statement saying rioting charges would be dropped. No one took that to mean the charge specifically of rioting. People thought that meant rioting in the sense that the various crimes associated with the riot. In Fort Worth and in New York, they're dropping the charges for ideological reasons. In New Mexico, whether you like the right-wing militia or not, you are allowed to open carry, same as the people in Chaz in Seattle. You are allowed to open carry. So they show up to a statue, open carrying, and they tell people not to destroy property. Yet they're being vilified as the bad guys. You know why? Because we are now facing ideological government. And perhaps there's nothing we can do about it. It's too pervasive. There's no way to necessarily separate the ideology from the government at this point. And it's going to tear us apart from the inside out. There was a story the other day that 3 cops. The reason I'm not leading with this is because there's some investigation ongoing. They're clarifying, but 3 cops in New York initially were claimed to have been intentionally poisoned with bleach. They bought a milkshake from Shake Shack. There was cleaner in it. They got sick and went to the hospital. They're expected to recover. Everybody saw this and immediately assumed it was an intentional attack on the police because we know where things are going. I mean, police are resigning in huge numbers. Departments are being shuttered. Dare I say, this is not, I don't think we're witnessing a real reform. I like what New Mexico is saying, that they're going to create a new community unit that responds to non-criminal issues. And I think that's actually really, really smart. Maybe that's what we need to happen. But what we're seeing with a lot of departments, the defunding, the complete abolishing of the Minneapolis Police Department to be replaced by something else, it's a dismantling of our country. They're tearing down Thomas Jefferson now. And you know where this goes. Somebody tweeted, let's stop pretending that we don't think, that this doesn't end with the burning of the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or otherwise. Absolutely. They tore down Thomas Jefferson. I know where this is going. Listen, every country on this planet was in some effect conquered by someone else. It doesn't mean we have to be happy about it. It means we just stop doing it. But you can't then go and try and reverse everything and start destroying property because you don't like the fact that you live somewhere where someone else hundreds of years ago, 400 or 500 years ago, came and took it over. If we were to reverse everything, how far back do we go? Who do we eventually give everything back to? It's an endless cycle that makes no sense. In my opinion, it's meant to destabilize us. And that's what's happening. We are being destabilized with these protests and with these riots. And you are going to see lines drawn in the sand. When people show up legally open carrying and a bunch of far left protesters try to destroy property, and the guys who didn't break the law are the criminals. That's amazing, isn't it? The way the mayor and the governor have framed this, they're blaming the people who showed up in every legal capacity to which they were allowed. The mob that showed up was there to commit a crime. They chased after the guy and beat him. And the guys who got chased after and beaten, who weren't committing a crime, are the bad guys. Now, again, like I said, you can argue that you don't like the ideology of them. That's fine. But it doesn't change the facts. What is happening, I think, is, I guess, logic and reason is losing the fight. It doesn't matter. If you're on their ideological side, you're okay. They'll protect you. They'll defend you. And this can only end with one thing. And I've said it over and over again, and I think it's hilarious how many people told me it could never happen. Could never happen. Civil war in this country. I said it several years ago. I think we're dangerously close, and I think it's escalating. I think it'll get worse. And I repeatedly said, if you think it's bad now, wait until 2020. Things are going to light up with this election coming up. I think this stuff is helping Trump, and it may help him win. But I've talked to a lot of hardcore Trump supporters, and I know there's a lot of people who will defend him no matter what. But I'm hearing from a lot of people, they're saying that they think he's too weak now, that he's not really doing anything, that he's caving to the protests, that he isn't standing up for justice, and there's no real out. Maybe that's it. Maybe there's nothing Trump can really do. But what's the alternative? Joe Biden? I don't know what's going to happen, man. I really don't. I do still lean towards Trump winning, But I'm seeing a lot of doubt from high-profile conservative individuals and former Trump supporters. Yeah, that's right, former Trump supporters. I'm not kidding. People saying that they won't even vote at this point. They're unhappy with what he's done. I mean, you've got people like Ann Coulter repeatedly coming out and slamming Trump. I guess we'll see, though, man. I'll leave it with this. Regardless of what you think of morality, when people without guns try to fight people with guns, the outcome is obvious. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I will see you all then.